Hello everyone, and welcome back to NPA Discovery, the place where we dive deep into the untold stories of Hollywood legends, iconic figures, and the people who shaped pop culture in ways you may never have imagined. If you enjoy fascinating life stories, inspiring journeys, and sometimes the hidden truths behind fame, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with friends who love classic television, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Your support means the world to us and gives us the motivation to keep producing high-quality content just like this. Now, let's talk about Florence Henderson, the woman who, for millions of viewers across America, will forever be remembered as Carol Brady from the Brady Bunch. Some would argue that Florence Henderson simply was Carol Brady, wholesome, smiling, and seemingly flawless. But the truth is, her journey from a dirt-poor childhood in Indiana to the glowing lights of Broadway, and finally to the television screens of nearly every household in America, was paved with extraordinary resilience. She faced crushing poverty, personal heartbreak, career setbacks, and secrets that she carried not only for herself but for others. And what makes her story even more compelling is the way she handled these burdens, not with scandalous outbursts or bitterness, but with grace, humor, and a quiet strength that very few truly appreciated. So, let's start at the beginning. Because Florence Henderson's story is not just about television fame, it's about how a woman from the humblest of beginnings found her way into history books as a symbol of family, perseverance, and love. Florence Agnes Henderson was born on Valentine's Day, 1934, a date that almost seems poetic, because if there's one thing her life symbolized, it was love. Love for family, love for music, and love for performing. She was the youngest of 10 children, raised in a poor farming family in Dale, Indiana. Now, when I say poor, I don't mean the kind of childhood where you had to share a bedroom with a sibling. No, Florence's childhood was one of true hardship. She later recalled nights when she and her brothers and sisters would huddle together under thin blankets, sometimes up to 4 children sharing a single bed, in a home without proper heat. In the middle of Indiana winters, this was more than uncomfortable, it was survival. And yet, even in those harsh conditions, there was something magical. Her mother, Elizabeth, refused to let poverty define her children's spirits. She gave Florence a gift that would shape her destiny, music. By the time little Florence was just 2 years old, her mother had already taught her dozens of songs. Imagine that, a toddler, barely able to walk steadily, singing lyrics with perfect recall. Music became her escape, her comfort, and her identity. Here's where I'd like to pause and reflect. This is what I find most powerful about Florence Henderson's early life. For so many people, poverty breaks them. It leaves scars that never heal. But for Florence, her struggles became fuel. They gave her empathy, determination, and an almost magnetic drive to create something better. Think about this, how many of us, when faced with hardship, complain, or give up? Florence did the opposite. By age 12, she wasn't just singing for fun, she was performing in grocery stores for locals, charming audiences with her voice. She was already building a foundation for a career she couldn't yet fully imagine. One local newspaper even wrote about her small-town performances, calling her a bright little star in the making. Can you picture that? A poor farm girl singing in a grocery store, unknowingly preparing herself for Broadway stages and Hollywood studios. Now, let's connect this to a broader lesson. Florence's childhood teaches us something incredibly important: your beginnings do not define your ending. You can be born into a family with nothing, you can face circumstances that feel impossible, but if you carry within you a gift, a passion, and the determination to keep going, those very hardships can become the foundation of your success. Florence wasn't just lucky, she was resilient. And that resilience carried her all the way to New York City by the time she was just 17. With little more than a suitcase and a dream, she enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. But let's not romanticize this too much. Life in New York was not glamorous for Florence. She lived in a women's residence, in a room so small she compared it to a walk-in closet. And yet, even in that tiny space, she dreamed big. Because sometimes, it's not about the size of your surroundings, it's about the size of your vision. Florence Henderson, more than America's TV mom. Welcome back, friends. If you're still with us, thank you for being part of this journey. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves classic television, and subscribe if you haven't already. Every click motivates us to bring you more powerful stories that not only entertain but also inspire. Now, let's continue peeling back the layers of Florence Henderson's extraordinary life. When Florence first set foot in New York City at just 17 years old, she was a wide-eyed girl from Indiana with nothing more than ambition and raw talent. And if you've ever chased a dream yourself, you know how frightening it feels to leave behind everything familiar for an uncertain future. She joined the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, a school that had produced legends. But as inspiring as that sounds, life for Florence was far from glamorous. She lived in a women's residence with a room so tiny that she compared it to a closet. And yet, she refused to be discouraged. This moment in her life teaches us something profound: opportunity rarely presents itself in comfort. For anyone watching who has ever worked 2 jobs, crammed into a small apartment, or lived with sacrifices while chasing a dream, you are walking the same path Florence once did. Her persistence paid off. By 1952, Henderson landed her Broadway debut in Wish You Were Here. Only 2 years later, she starred in Fanny, a musical that ran for an astonishing 888 performances. Just imagine the endurance, the discipline, the charisma it takes to captivate audiences night after night for nearly 3 years straight. But then, fate delivered her a terrifying twist. In the mid-1950s, Florence was told she had a bone deformity in her inner ear, a condition that threatened her hearing. For a singer and actress, this wasn't just a medical problem, it was potentially career-ending. Think about that for a moment. Everything she had sacrificed for, every late-night rehearsal, every audition, every dream, suddenly hung in the balance. But Florence wasn't about to let her story end there. With courage and medical help, she underwent surgery and emerged victorious. She regained her hearing and, with it, her future. Here's where her story resonates deeply: setbacks don't have to define us. In fact, it is often in those low valleys that our strength is forged. For Florence, this trial didn't stop her, it sharpened her determination. With her hearing restored, Florence stepped into the next chapter: television. In 1958, she made her small-screen debut in a TV adaptation of Little Women. It wasn't an instant breakthrough, but it opened doors. And then came the opportunity of a lifetime: the role of Carol Brady. Interestingly, Florence almost didn't get the part. It had originally been offered to another star, Shirley Jones. Shirley turned it down because she didn't want to be typecast as just a mom. It was a decision that forever changed Florence's destiny. Now, here's where things get intriguing. Florence herself later admitted she had mixed feelings about Carol Brady. She admired the character but often felt the role was too one-dimensional. She petitioned producers to let Carol have a career outside the home, to reflect real women's lives. But producers refused. To them, Carol Brady had to stay within the mold of the perfect housewife. What fascinates me here is how Florence Henderson was always ahead of her time. While society clung to a narrow definition of womanhood, she was already pushing back, arguing for balance, equality, and realism. She wanted Carol Brady to be a woman who not only nurtured her family but also pursued her own identity. This tells us something powerful: sometimes you can play a role, even embody it beautifully, while still challenging the limitations it represents. Florence was grateful for Carol Brady, but she never let that role box her in. Living a double life, between 2 families. When the Brady Bunch began filming in Los Angeles, Florence faced another challenge: her real family was thousands of miles away in New York. She was married to Ira Bernstein and raising 4 children. So how did she manage? Every weekend, she boarded a flight from LA to New York. Week after week, year after year. Think about that level of dedication. It wasn't just about showing up for her job, but also showing up for her family. She lived in 2 worlds, one as the beloved TV mom of millions, and the other as a real mother desperately trying to stay connected to her own children. And while fans adored Carol Brady, Florence paid a heavy price for that double life: exhaustion, stress, and endless sacrifice. This part of her story reminds us of something many parents today can relate to: the impossible balancing act between work and family. Florence Henderson, despite her fame, wasn't exempt from that struggle. In fact, it was the very heartbeat of her real life. When fiction crossed the line into reality. But sometimes, her TV family blurred the line between fiction and reality. One of the most infamous stories comes from her on-screen son, Barry Williams, who played Greg Brady. When Barry was just 15 years old, he developed a crush on Florence, who was 36 at the time. Boldly, he asked her out on a date. Now, for many people, that would sound like scandal waiting to happen. But Florence handled it with her trademark grace. She agreed to a harmless dinner, allowed him his teenage fantasy moment, and ended the night with nothing more than a motherly peck on the cheek. Barry later admitted that the whole experience was innocent and sweet, and Florence always laughed it off, making clear that she was never interested in young boys. She was a married woman and a professional. What strikes me here is not the awkwardness of the situation, but rather how Florence always knew how to walk the line between kindness and boundaries. Instead of humiliating Barry or making him feel foolish, she turned the incident into a memory that he would cherish rather than regret. That's not just professionalism, that's compassion. And it reveals why her TV children loved her so deeply. Scandals, rumors, and resilience. We've seen Florence Henderson as the determined Broadway actress, the pioneering Carol Brady, and the devoted mother juggling two families. But now, it's time to look at the other side of fame, the shadow cast by the spotlight. Because behind every adored celebrity lies a life filled not just with triumphs, but with whispers, rumors, and struggles that test their very humanity. The affair rumors that shocked fans. One of the most shocking rumors that followed Florence involved an alleged affair with New York City Mayor John Lindsay in the 1960s. According to Florence's own memoir, she did indeed spend a single night with Lindsay. And while this revelation startled many fans, she framed it with honesty and humor, calling it a mistake, one born from loneliness during a time when she was struggling in her marriage. The media, of course, ran wild with the story. Headlines painted her as scandalous. But Florence refused to let it destroy her image or her dignity. Instead, she faced it head-on with candor. What fascinates me here is her willingness to admit her flaws. In an era when most stars buried their secrets, Florence chose honesty. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something important: perfection is a myth. Even America's favorite mom was human. The darkest rumor, the herpes myth. Perhaps the cruelest scandal to attach itself to Florence Henderson was the infamous herpes rumor. It began when tabloids twisted her confession about her single night with Mayor Lindsay. Some claimed that she contracted an STD from the encounter and that it affected her for life. Florence quickly and firmly denied these accusations, calling them absolutely ridiculous. But like many false rumors, it refused to die. For years, jokes and whispers circulated, turning a respected woman into the subject of cheap gossip. Here's the painful reality: for women in Hollywood, one rumor can overshadow decades of achievement. And that's exactly what Florence had to fight against. But rather than let the lies define her, she did something extraordinary: she used humor as her weapon. Florence would often make light-hearted remarks about the rumor in interviews, disarming the gossip and reclaiming her power. This, to me, is one of her most powerful lessons. Sometimes the only way to fight cruelty is with confidence and laughter. While Florence's career was flourishing, her marriage to Ira Bernstein was slowly crumbling. The pressures of distance, travel, and constant work strained their relationship. By 1985, after nearly 3 decades of marriage, the couple divorced. For Florence, this was devastating. But once again, she found a way to transform heartbreak into growth. She remained on good terms with Bernstein for the sake of their children, proving that love doesn't have to vanish after separation, it can evolve. Later, she found love again with hypnotherapist Dr. John Kappas, whom she married in 1987. This second marriage brought her stability and joy until his passing in 2002. What strikes me here is Florence's capacity for resilience. She experienced the sting of betrayal, divorce, and loss, but she never gave in to bitterness. Instead, she always chose compassion and forward motion. The truth about America's Mom. When we think of Florence Henderson, many of us picture Carol Brady's flawless hair, warm smile, and motherly wisdom. But Florence herself often said she didn't always feel like that perfect mom. She admitted to moments of insecurity, guilt about leaving her children for work, and a constant fear of being misunderstood. And yet, her honesty about these struggles made her even more relatable. She reminded the world that even America's Mom wrestled with the same doubts and imperfections as everyone else. In many ways, the controversies, scandals, and struggles humanized her. Instead of shattering her image, they revealed the depth of her character. A final tribute to Florence Henderson. The camera fades in on clips of Florence Henderson throughout the decades, young and radiant on Broadway, smiling as Carol Brady in the 1970s, laughing warmly in interviews, dancing gracefully in her later years. Florence Henderson's journey was never simple. She was a girl born into poverty, a dreamer who climbed from small-town Indiana to the dazzling lights of Broadway. She was a working actress who stumbled into history when she became the matriarch of America's most famous fictional family. She was a woman who endured heartbreak, scandal, and loss, yet always chose to keep moving forward. And through it all, she gave the world something rare: comfort. The woman behind Carol Brady. It's easy to remember Florence only as Carol Brady, the smiling, patient mom who seemed to have all the answers. But the real woman was far more fascinating. Florence was ambitious, flawed, and deeply human. She struggled, she adapted, and she triumphed, not because life was easy, but because she met life with courage. Her laughter was genuine. Her warmth was real. And that is why fans connected with her, not just on screen, but in person. The legacy lives on. Today, every rerun of the Brady Bunch, every parody sketch, every reference to Carol Brady, keeps Florence alive. Generations who never saw the show during its original run continue to discover it, and through it, discover Florence. She may be gone, but the lessons she embodied remain. That kindness never goes out of style. That authenticity is more powerful than perfection. That reinvention is always possible, no matter your age. Florence Henderson left us with more than memories. She left us with a blueprint for living with joy, resilience, and grace. The screen slowly fades to black and white photos of Florence through the years. Gentle, nostalgic music plays. Florence Henderson was more than an actress. She was more than Carol Brady. She was a light that shone through hardship, through triumph, and into the hearts of millions. She taught us that family is not about perfection. It's about love. And in that love, Florence Henderson will never be forgotten.